The room throbbed with corporate energy as more than 150 seasoned professionals debated the fluctuating revenue projections glowing on the massive LED screen. Conversations rose and fell in pockets across the hall as experts analyzed figures, took notes, and exchanged guarded glances. A guest raised a complicated question that the presenter struggled to explain, leaving an awkward silence hovering in the air like a suspended breath. That was when Liora, seated quietly in the middle row, lifted her hand and rose with the calm assurance of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. Her voice flowed evenly across the room as she said, "I believe the projection line is inconsistent with the underlying growth assumption on slide 14, and the clarity of her tone caused several heads to turn in curiosity and admiration." But before the presenter or the audience could respond, the tension in Derek's posture shifted into something sharp and threatening, as though he sensed his authority slipping from his grip. In one quick, irritated stride, he marched straight to the podium, seized the microphone with unnecessary force, and faced the hall with a scowl of exaggerated superiority. "Please ignore her," he barked, and the microphone amplified his voice with a biting edge. "She's being foolish again." His words sliced through the hall, silencing every whisper and drawing all attention to the humiliating spectacle he was creating in real time. He wasn't finished. With a cruel smirk, he added, "Look at her, standing there chubby and confused. Sit down before you confuse important people." The collective gasp that followed hit the room like the sound of glass breaking. People stared at him, then at her, stunned and horrified, unable to process the fact that he was speaking to her this way. And because no one in the hall knew she was his wife, the insult struck harder, deeper, more viciously than anyone could comprehend. Liora froze, the microphone trembling in her hand, as the weight of 100 stares pressed into her like a crushing wall. A senior economist, broad-shouldered and visibly offended, was the first to rise from his seat. His voice trembled with restrained fury as he addressed Derek from across the hall. "This is highly unprofessional," he declared, his gaze firm. That woman raised a rational, technically sound point. His defense of Liora cut through the tension, signaling that Derek's outburst had not gone unnoticed. Before Derek could respond, a female CEO at the front row stood sharply, her tone crisp and unforgiving. "If this is how you treat people who challenge your projections," she said coldly, "then your leadership style is deeply flawed." Her words stung with the accuracy of a scalpel. Liora, meanwhile, felt the heat of humiliation burning beneath her skin. She lowered the microphone slowly, her fingers trembling uncontrollably as her breath tightened in her chest. Her intention had never been to embarrass anyone or draw attention to herself. She had simply noticed a mistake and offered clarity. Now she found herself drowning beneath a wave of shame she had not anticipated. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every gasp in the hall felt like a blade. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, an aching reminder that public humiliation carried a pain far deeper than private betrayal. Then the elderly board advisor, a man whose words carried weight across industries, rose with the help of his cane. The room fell into an expectant hush as he turned toward Derek. His voice, though soft, thundered with moral authority. "Young man," he began slowly, "arrogance is a seed that destroys its planter long before it destroys the ground." His stare held Derek in place, leaving the hall in a thick silence. Only Derek seemed blind to the consequences already unfolding around him, standing stiffly with the brittle pride of someone who believed he had just asserted dominance. Unaware, he had just lost the respect of an entire room. Just when the hall's tension seemed ready to settle into a heavy, uncomfortable quiet, the double doors swung open, and Amaya walked in with a confidence that stole air from a room. Tall, elegant, polished from head to toe, she moved with the deliberate grace of someone who expected attention wherever she went. Heads turned instantly. Her resemblance to Liora was subtle yet unmistakable, similar eyes, similar posture, but her aura was vastly different. Bold, deliberate, hungry for visibility. Derek's reaction was instantaneous. His eyes lit up the moment they landed on her, his shoulders relaxing, as though he had just found comfort in chaos. The shift in his expression was unmistakable, like a man seeing someone he adored more than he should. Several guests exchanged bewildered glances. The murmurs began softly, then gained speed like rolling thunder. "Is that his wife?" someone whispered. Then who was the woman he insulted? The atmosphere grew thick with suspicion, and the room began to feel like the stage of a drama none of them expected to witness live. Liora felt her stomach twist painfully as she watched Amaya glide into the front row, her eyes catching Liora's for a brief but chilling moment. It was a stare without apology, without shame, almost triumphant in its boldness. Liora's breath trembled, and before tears could betray her resolve, she gently placed the microphone on her chair, turned away from the burning room, and walked out quietly. Her steps were steady, but each one felt like stepping deeper into a heartbreak she hadn't known she was carrying. Derek pushed through the rest of the presentation with the strained arrogance of someone pretending everything was fine. His voice moved mechanically through the slides, but the hall's atmosphere had shifted into quiet judgment. When the session finally ended and a hesitant applause followed, Derek stepped off the stage, adjusting his tie with a forced confidence. But instead of looking toward the exit where Liora had slipped out moments earlier, his eyes scanned the front row, searching only for Amaya. He reached her within seconds, and Amaya rose with a smile designed to be seen. Without hesitation, without a flicker of guilt, Derek reached for her hand. A ripple of shock swept across the hall, followed by sharp gasps and the discreet lifting of several phones. A few guests exchanged looks of pure disbelief. "This man is finished," someone muttered under their breath. Derek and Amaya walked out together with synchronized steps, the kind of walk only people deeply entangled in something secretive and forbidden could share. Outside, Liora stood beside her car, trying to gather the scattered fragments of her composure. The cold air brushed against her face, but it did nothing to numb the ache in her chest. Her husband had not just humiliated her, he had walked out with her own stepsister. The betrayal lodged itself deep in her chest like a foreign object. She took a shaky breath, unaware that fate was seconds away from delivering a message that would compete with the cruelty she had just endured. She slipped into the back seat of her car and closed the door gently, as though afraid the world would hear her breaking. The silence within the vehicle pressed around her like a thick blanket, offering no comfort. The humiliation replayed in her mind with brutal clarity, Derek's voice, the smirk on his lips, the stares in the hall, the confusion in people's eyes. She tried to swallow the pain, but the tears came anyway, hot and uncontrollable, sliding down her cheeks in a steady, aching rhythm. Every breath felt heavier than the last. Her phone buzzed once. She ignored it. It buzzed twice. She still ignored it. When it buzzed a third time, something in her, maybe instinct, maybe exhaustion, forced her to look. The message on her screen glowed like a contradiction sent from a different universe entirely. Kaito, the $630 million acquisition documents are ready for your signature. Congratulations in advance. For a long moment, she simply stared, unable to reconcile the woman who had just been torn apart in public with the woman being congratulated for one of the biggest tech negotiations on the continent. It felt unreal, like the universe reminding her she was far more than the pain trying to swallow her. Her breathing steadied little by little as she wiped her tears with trembling fingers. Pain still throbbed inside her, but beneath it a small, stubborn flame flickered, one that refused to be extinguished by humiliation or betrayal. She exhaled slowly, letting the message sink into her bones. Because even broken wings, she realized, still remember how to rise. The days that followed felt like Liora was living beneath a thick, suffocating fog, one that dimmed the light in her home, in her heart, and in her very sense of self. She kept the curtains drawn, choosing darkness over the harsh clarity of daylight, because daylight demanded awareness, and awareness demanded remembering. Remembering meant replaying Derek's words over and over, until the sound of his voice felt etched into her bones. She barely ate. Food felt like a chore, and her throat closed at the mere thought of swallowing anything. She let her phone ring unanswered, her emails pile up, her responsibilities slip into silence. Every vibration of her phone felt like an unwelcome reminder that the world was moving forward, while she was frozen in a moment that had wounded her more deeply than she had believed possible. Her heart ached in ways she didn't know hearts could ache. Meanwhile, the outside world churned with its own storm, one she tried, desperately, to ignore. Clips from the exhibition circulated quietly in business circles, forwarded from executive to executive with murmured commentary attached. Opinions spread like wildfire. Who was that woman? Why did Derek humiliate her like that? Is he mentally stable? But Liora didn't need anyone to tell her how the world was interpreting the event. She could feel the weight of it even through her closed doors. She tried not to care, but the humiliation clung to her like a scent she couldn't wash away. She couldn't escape the sinking feeling that the entire room had witnessed a moment that should never have belonged to strangers. And Derek? He behaved as though nothing unusual had happened. He moved around the house with loud footsteps, slamming doors, humming, eating, scrolling on his phone, never once acknowledging the storm he had left inside her. He didn't apologize, didn't reach out, didn't ask if she was okay. It was as though her pain was invisible to him, her silence nothing but background noise. He treated her retreat as an exaggeration, a weakness, or worse, an inconvenience. And that hurt more than the insult itself. Because humiliation in public was one thing, but emotional abandonment afterward felt like being asked to drown quietly without disturbing the surface of the water. On the 8th morning, something shifted, not violently, not suddenly, but like a tired tide rising after a long, breathless night. Liora woke before dawn and sat upright on her bed, different from a woman who had cried herself to sleep the night before. The pain was still there, but it had hardened slightly, transforming into a quiet determination she didn't yet understand. She rose slowly, walked to the mirror she had been avoiding for days, and looked at herself, not at the puffiness around her eyes, not at the exhaustion carved into her face, but at the strength buried beneath everything she had endured. And she realized something profound. Staying in one place, emotionally or physically, would only trap her deeper in a wound that needed movement to heal. She needed to leave, to breathe different air, to be in a space where Derek's voice could not follow her. So she pulled out her suitcase, laying it open on the bed like a symbol of rebirth. She packed clothes with steady hands, choosing outfits with intention, not for beauty, but for purpose. Her passport slipped easily into her purse, the ticket confirmation already waiting in her email, a silent reminder that she had a world waiting for her outside the walls of her pain. But when she stepped into the hallway, suitcase in hand, Derek appeared from the living room, his expression tightening the moment he saw her. He looked her up and down, and for the first time in days he actually reacted, not with concern, but with suspicion. "Where do you think you're going with that?" he demanded, stepping into her path, as though he had the right to cage her movements. "I'm traveling," she said simply, her voice calm but cold, the kind of cold that forms only after surviving deep fire. Derek scoffed, crossing his arms. "Traveling for what? In your state? You're being dramatic, Liora." She didn't blink. "I don't owe you that answer." His eyes widened in disbelief, offended more by her refusal than by her departure. "You're not going anywhere," he insisted, trying to block her from passing. But she stepped around him with quiet grace, her hand gripping the suitcase handle with the resolve of someone who had learned, not by choice but by experience, that silence could be a weapon and movement could be liberation. She walked out the door without explaining where she was going, and without realizing this travel was the key to the karma Derek had unknowingly invited into his life. The moment Liora arrived at Aurelia Tech headquarters, it felt like she had stepped into an entirely different world, a world where she was seen, valued, and respected without having to beg for it. Her team greeted her with warm smiles, relieved voices, and gentle reassurances that she had been missed. They asked no invasive questions, sensing she needed space, but they welcomed her presence as though she had returned from a long, purposeful journey. Walking through the halls she had built, from the first scratch designs on a notebook to the cutting-edge labs buzzing with innovation, reminded her of who she really was. She wasn't foolish. She wasn't confused. She wasn't chubby. She was the backbone of a company trusted by nations and investors alike. She was a leader, even on days when she could barely stand. In the boardroom, screens displayed updates from Kaido Holdings, their negotiation team already preparing the final documents. The $630 million deal was more than numbers. It was legacy. It was vision. It was the culmination of years of sleepless nights and relentless discipline. Sitting in her executive chair, a quiet authority emanating from her posture, she reviewed legal drafts, adjusted clauses, confirmed projections. Her voice held weight. Her opinions shaped outcomes. Every nod from the board, every agreement from her partners, gently rewove the threads of self-worth that Derek had tried to sever. She realized something powerful inside that glass-walled room. The world respected her intelligence, even if her husband resented it. Yet beneath all this renewed strength, a softer ache remained, an echo from a hall where she had been humiliated without mercy. She pushed through it, acknowledging the pain without letting it dictate her direction. Her work became her grounding force, and the steady rhythm of progress began stitching small pieces of her spirit back together. She wasn't healed yet, but she was moving, and movement, she realized, was its own kind of triumph. As Liora prepared for her international departure, memories she had buried long ago rose slowly to the surface, reminding her that betrayal never grows in a day. Amaya hadn't always been this glossy, confident woman who walked into halls as though applause waited for her at the door. She had once been a girl shaped by insecurity, by resentment, by the constant shadow cast by Liora's quiet brilliance. Even in childhood, comparisons followed them like persistent echoes. Teachers praising Liora's intelligence, family friends admiring her composure. Amaya learned early that beauty earned attention, but intelligence earned respect, and respect was the one currency she had never been able to acquire. That seed of envy planted itself deep, growing quietly with each passing year. Their teenage years had widened the gap. Liora thrived academically, effortlessly drawing opportunities that Amaya had to struggle for. Amaya's jealousy mutated into something darker as she watched Liora succeed with a grace she couldn't imitate. She never said aloud, but envy lived inside her like a companion, whispering lies about self-worth, pushing her to find validation where she could. When Derek entered the picture, charming, ambitious, and easily impressed, Amaya saw him not merely as a man, but as a chance to take something that wasn't hers, something that would finally make her feel superior to her stepsister. Their affair didn't begin because of love. It began because of insecurity dressed as desire. Liora had never suspected the depth of the bitterness Amaya carried. She assumed their differences were normal sibling contrasts, not resentments with sharp edges. Now sitting alone in her quiet hotel room on the night before her flight, the memories hurt in a different way, not because of what had happened, but because of what had been building for years behind her back. The betrayal she experienced at the exhibition was only the final chapter of a story that had begun long before Derek ever held a microphone. Betrayal, she realized, is almost always rooted in someone else's unresolved wounds. Back home, Derek experienced the first ripple of the consequences he had unknowingly summoned. It began subtly, like small cracks forming beneath the surface of a structure that had always appeared solid. His phone buzzed with messages from colleagues asking uncomfortable questions. Investors sent emails requesting clarification on the revenue projection error Liora had attempted to highlight before being silenced. And then came the formal inquiry from the board, a polite but pointed request for an internal review of his presentation and conduct during the exhibition. Derek dismissed the concerns at first, telling himself the room had overreacted and that everything would soon blow over. But it didn't blow over. Instead, the issue expanded as word spread across corporate networks. Guests who had witnessed the scene firsthand recounted their versions to others, and each retelling chipped away at Derek's professional image. The financial discrepancy Liora had mentioned was investigated thoroughly, and to Derek's shock, she had been absolutely correct. The projection was flawed. The numbers were off, and the mistake was his. The board wasn't furious yet, but they were disappointed, deeply, visibly disappointed. Their disappointment carried a sharper sting than anger ever could. At home, Derek paced through the living room with restless frustration, unable to understand why everything felt as though it was slipping from his grasp. He didn't know that Liora had traveled. He didn't know what she was doing. He didn't know why her silence suddenly felt so loud. For the first time in a long time, he sensed something shifting beneath the foundation of his life, a force he couldn't control, one that was beginning to rearrange his world with steady, deliberate precision. Karma had entered the room, and Derek, in all his arrogance, didn't even recognize her arrival. The signing ceremony in Tokyo unfolded like a dream wrapped inside destiny, a moment so monumental that Liora felt both present and slightly outside her own body as she walked into the boardroom filled with global executives. The tall glass windows framed the skyline like a living painting, and the city's quiet hum felt strangely comforting. Representatives from Kaido Holdings stood when she entered, extending warm smiles and respectful bows, gestures that pierced the ache still lodged in her chest from Derek's cruelty. As she reviewed the final clauses, adjusting specific terms with the sharpness of a seasoned strategist, it became clear that this wasn't just a business milestone. This was a moment that validated every sacrifice she had made, every silent battle she had fought, and every insult she had endured. When she finally signed her name across the dotted line, the room erupted into applause, and the sound washed over her like a bomb. She had closed a deal worth more than Derek could ever fathom, a deal that would not only reshape her company, but also reposition Africa on the global tech map. News outlets picked up the headline within hours. Social media buzzed with excitement, and influential business pages reposted her photo with captions celebrating her brilliance. Analysts described the acquisition as historic, visionary, and a masterstroke of leadership. The world seemed to pause and stare at her with awe, and for the first time since the humiliating exhibition, Liora felt seen for who she really was, competent, powerful, deserving. Yet beneath her composed smiles during interviews and congratulatory dinners, she felt a quiet ache, a kind of emotional residue left behind by the betrayal she hadn't fully processed. It was strange to realize she could hold triumph in one hand and heartbreak in the other, and still walk forward with both. Meanwhile, back in Lagos, Derek scrolled through his phone in disbelief as headlines flooded his screen. His eyes widened as he took in each detail of the deal, its scope, its prestige, its implications. The comments from business colleagues stung. Imagine insulting a mind capable of this. That woman he embarrassed? She's worth more than his entire company. Derek had always known his wife was intelligent, but he had never imagined she was the CEO behind one of the continent's most influential tech firms. The realization hit him with a force that nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. While the world celebrated her rise, Derek felt the first true wave of fear wash over him. He had mocked a queen he never bothered to understand. The weeks that followed her return from Tokyo became a whirlwind of international admiration and professional triumph. Invitations poured in from global conferences, government panels, innovation summits, and prestigious universities requesting her as a keynote speaker. Every time she stepped onto a stage, audiences rose to their feet, captivated by her calm presence and the intelligence that shone quietly beneath her words. She spoke not with loudness, but with clarity, not with ego, but with assurance, traits that made industry leaders lean forward when she spoke. Her leadership style became a subject of discussion in business forums. How she balanced firmness with compassion, how she solved crises with creativity, how she built an empire without ever raising her voice. Each achievement created new ripples, pushing Aurelia Tech into territories it had only dreamed of entering before. As the company expanded into East, West, and Southern Africa, Liora became a symbol of resilience, proof that quiet women were not weak, and that humility could build stronger bridges than aggression ever could. She was featured on magazine covers, interviewed on global platforms, honored with awards for innovation and impact. Her image filled billboards and digital banners across airports, quietly inspiring thousands of young girls who saw in her a reflection of who they could become. Yet through all the applause and admiration, she never allowed pride to cloud her spirit. She carried herself with a gentleness that made people love her, and a strength that made people respect her. Her rise did not come from destroying anyone. It came from refusing to be destroyed. And Derek? His world shrank as hers expanded. He watched her interviews late at night, sitting in the dark like a man studying a stranger he once shared a home with. He felt a heaviness settle in his chest as he replayed the exhibition scene in his mind, realizing just how foolish, how painfully foolish he had been. Investors who once sought his attention now asked him awkward questions about his behavior. Some subtly distanced themselves from him. Others withdrew partnership discussions, citing concerns about his judgment. Every headline that celebrated Liora felt like a personal indictment against the pride that had blinded him. He could not escape the fact that the woman he embarrassed in public was now a global figure rising far beyond his reach. Karma was no longer a concept. It was his daily companion. While Liora's star burned brighter than ever, Amaya's envy grew like a storm cloud with no outlet for release. Social media updates about Liora's achievements felt like knives slicing through her fragile pride. She would scroll through photos of Liora on global stages, smiling gracefully, shaking hands with world leaders, and her insides would twist with a fury she could no longer hide. The affair with Derek, which once made her feel superior, now tasted bitter, like a decision made from insecurity rather than desire. She began pressuring Derek relentlessly, insisting he finalize a divorce so she could take Liora's place publicly, as though replacing her would restore the confidence she lacked. But Derek, now intimidated by the magnitude of Liora's influence, hesitated. Even in his arrogance, he sensed that divorcing a woman with this kind of global stature would bury him alive in scandal. Amaya began unraveling. Her once polished confidence cracked into agitation, jealous tantrums, sleepless nights, endless speculation about how Liora had kept her CEO identity hidden. She threw jabs at Derek, accusing him of being too weak to claim her fully, accusing him of enjoying the humiliation he placed on his wife. But beneath all her venom, the truth gnawed at her. She knew she never measured up to Liora's authenticity, and the world was confirming what she had spent years trying to deny. The affair had not elevated her. It had exposed her insecurity to herself. And insecurity, once exposed, becomes an enemy with no mercy. Meanwhile, Derek began noticing the cracks that had always been there in Amaya. Her jealousy was louder, her entitlement sharper, her snide comments less disguised. He found himself recoiling from her touch, irritated by her presence, suffocated by her demands. For the first time, he saw the affair clearly, not as a romantic escape, but as a foolish entanglement built on vanity, deception, and self-delusion. And every time Amaya argued, he glimpsed the truth. He had traded loyalty for chaos, traded stability for desperation, traded gold for glitter. Amaya was no longer the exciting distraction she once seemed. She had become a mirror, showing him the ugliness of his own decisions. Liora had returned home from another international panel when she overheard the argument that shattered the last illusions she held about her marriage. Derek's voice, tense and defensive, carried from the living room as she passed the hallway. Amaya's voice, shrill with accusation, came through the speakerphone. Their conversation was raw, unfiltered, and loaded with years of betrayal she had not known existed. "You promised me you'd leave her," Amaya yelled. "You said she was nothing." Derek's response was filled with panic rather than remorse. "Things have changed, Amaya. She's different now. You don't understand what's happening." Liora froze, the sound of her stepsister's voice slicing through her like a cold blade. The affair was not new. It had been living beneath her roof, long before the exhibition, long before the humiliation, long before she ever suspected a thing. Her knees weakened, but she's steadying herself against the wall as their words unraveled the timeline she had never been given. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment she had tried to understand Derek's emotional distance now had a name, Amaya. She listened as Amaya mocked her, calling her too soft, calling her forgettable, calling her a woman with no fire. Derek didn't defend her, not once. And that silence, more than anything he had said during the exhibition, felt like a wound deep enough to steal her breath. She backed away quietly, retreating into the safety of her room, where she finally let herself feel the full weight of truths she hadn't asked for. As she sat on the edge of her bed, her hands trembling in her lap, a strange calm settled over her. Not peace, not acceptance, but something clearer, sharper. The betrayal no longer confused her. It clarified everything. The man she had loved was not the man standing in her home. The sister she trusted was a stranger in disguise. And the life she thought she had was not the one she was living. For the first time since the exhibition, the pain did not overwhelm her. It guided her. Betrayal had broken the illusions. What remained now was truth, and truth, she realized, was the beginning of liberation. Liora chose to confront Amaya with the quiet strength of a woman who had cried her last tear for the wrong people. She invited her to meet at a private lounge, neutral ground, calm lighting, soft music playing in the background. Amaya arrived adorned in confidence, wearing a smile that suggested she expected victory or drama, whichever came first. But the moment she sat across from Liora, she noticed something unsettling. Liora was not broken. She was not shaking. She was not begging for answers. She sat with a posture of someone who knew the power of silence and the value of self-respect. That alone made Amaya uncomfortable. When Liora finally spoke, her voice was low and steady, every word measured with precision. She didn't accuse, didn't scream, didn't demand explanations. She simply outlined what she had heard, what she had pieced together, and how the betrayal had carved wounds no apology could heal. Amaya tried to deflect at first, laughing, shrugging, tossing her hair as if the entire affair were a harmless game. But as Liora continued, her composure began to crumble. For every attempt Amaya made to justify herself, Liora responded with truth layered in dignity, not rage. And nothing disarms a guilty person faster than dignity they cannot match. Amaya soon realized she wasn't facing the woman she had once mocked. She was facing the woman she could never become. The confrontation ended not with an explosion, but with a quiet line that froze Amaya where she sat. "You didn't break me. You revealed yourself. And that's a burden you'll carry for the rest of your life, not me." Amaya's confidence fractured instantly. Her mascaraed eyes flickered with something she'd never shown Liora before, fear. Not fear of Liora's anger, but fear of her strength. Liora stood, gathered her purse, and walked away without looking back. Amaya remained seated, trembling in a silence she couldn't escape. It was the first time she realized karma didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived in the form of a woman rising from a place she thought she had buried. Liora returned home that evening with a calm so unnaturally deep that it frightened even her as she stepped through the front door. She found Derek pacing in the living room, his head buried in his hands, his phone tossed carelessly on the couch beside him. He jumped when he saw her, eyes wide, face tense, as though he had been wrestling with the truth and losing miserably. "Liora, we need to talk," he blurted out, but the urgency in his voice no longer stirred fear or anxiety in her. She sat down across from him, not shrinking, not trembling, but watching him with the steady gaze of someone who had finally removed the blindfold she had worn for years. She let him speak first, and his words came out in fragments, excuses laced with panic, explanations tinted with guilt, denials breaking apart the moment they left his mouth. She didn't interrupt. She simply let him unravel. As he spoke, she saw a man who had lived too comfortably inside lies he thought he could control. Derek confessed what she already knew. The affair had been long, deliberate, rooted in a betrayal that began when she was still giving him the best of her heart. He tried to twist the narrative, painting himself as confused, pressured, vulnerable, but not once did he take full responsibility. And every time he used the words mistake or misunderstanding, Liora felt something inside her detach further from him. When he finally paused, waiting for her to cry, to shout, to accuse him, she did none of it. Instead, she leaned back slightly and asked a single question. "Why did you hate my confidence so much?" Derek froze, startled by the simplicity of the question, because it struck directly at the flaw he had tried to hide from himself. Her intelligence intimidated him. Her calmness reminded him of his insecurities. He had married a woman he didn't know how to understand, and instead of growing, he tried to shrink her. The silence that followed felt like the closing of a chapter, though Derek didn't yet understand what he had lost. He reached for her hand, tears brimming in his eyes, the fear of losing her finally sinking into his bones. But Liora gently pulled her hand back, not in bitterness, but in clarity. "Your betrayal didn't break me," she said softly. "It revealed the truth about you." And in that moment, Derek felt something crumble inside him, something he knew he would never be able to rebuild. She stood, walked away, and for the first time since their marriage began, she felt a deep and liberating distance settle between them. Derek's life began to unravel slowly at first, like a rope fraying strand by strand, then rapidly, with the force of consequences he had long ignored. The board of directors summoned him urgently, their faces tense as they presented the results of the internal investigation. The revenue projection error he dismissed so arrogantly had deeper implications for investor trust, and his public humiliation of a woman at the exhibition had circulated widely enough to damage the company's reputation. Investors withdrew interest. 2 major partners requested to renegotiate terms. Colleagues avoided him in hallways. Conversations paused when he entered rooms, and whispers followed him like shadows. He tried to defend himself, but every explanation he offered sounded weaker than the last. The arrogance that once fueled him had turned into the shovel dismantling his own credibility. Meanwhile, Amaya's unraveling became even more dramatic. She grew erratic, lashing out at Derek for things beyond his control, accusing him of cowardice, of weakness, of ruining her chances at becoming the woman of a powerful man. She no longer pretended to love him. She wanted his status, his resources, his name, and now that everything was slipping from his grasp, her resentment sharpened into open hostility. Their arguments became daily spectacles, explosive and bitter, built on a foundation of lies and insecurity. When she finally realized Derek could no longer offer her the social elevation she craved, she abandoned him without ceremony, blocking his calls, removing him from her social feeds, and erasing every trace of the relationship she once flaunted. Karma worked in silence, but with perfect precision, peeling away every illusion he held. The days that followed became a mirror Derek could not escape. His home felt emptier. His bank account looked thinner. His inbox had more warnings than opportunities. Even his reflection began to shift. He saw a man who once mocked his wife publicly, now sitting alone in the ruins of choices he could no longer blame on anyone else. He began to replay the exhibition moment over and over, feeling the sting of embarrassment every time he heard his own voice echo in memory. She's being foolish again. Now he realized he hadn't humiliated Liora that day. He had humiliated himself. For the first time in his life, he understood the meaning of karma. It does not strike with anger. It strikes with truth. While Derek descended into chaos, Liora began a journey in the opposite direction, toward healing, clarity, and gentle self-restoration. She booked weekly therapy sessions, not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to confront the wounds she refused to let define her. Her therapist listened with compassion as Liora recounted the exhibition humiliation, the years of subtle emotional neglect, and the deep betrayal woven by both Derek and Amaya. Through reflective exercises and conversations, she learned to separate her worth from the actions of others. She discovered that healing was not forgetting. It was choosing not to let what hurt her control her future steps. Slowly, the heaviness around her heart softened, replaced by a quiet resilience that radiated from the inside out. Liora also began nurturing the parts of herself she had neglected in her marriage. She reconnected with friends she had drifted away from, visited serene gardens on weekends, journaled late into the night, and allowed herself to rediscover joy in small, ordinary things, like the smell of rain on pavement, the warmth of afternoon sunlight, the comfort of music playing softly in her home. She embraced solitude not as loneliness, but as a sacred space where she could hear her own thoughts without distortion. Her spirit, once bruised and shaken, began to stand tall again. Pain became less of a weight and more of a lesson, one she carried with grace instead of bitterness. Professionally, she soared even higher. Her leadership inspired her team, Her strategic decisions strengthened Aurelia Tech, and her poise during high-pressure meetings earned her admiration across industries. She no longer felt the need to hide her brilliance to soothe someone else's insecurity. She walked into rooms knowing exactly who she was, and more importantly, who she would never allow herself to become again. Healing, she realized, was not returning to who she once was. It was becoming someone wiser, stronger, and more self-assured than she had ever imagined. Derek requested the meeting with a tone so defeated that Liora agreed, not out of emotional obligation, but out of closure. They met in a quiet lounge far from the noise of the city. Derek arrived early, looking smaller than she remembered, not physically, but in spirit. When she walked in, he stood quickly, eyes filling with the kind of remorse that comes only after life has stripped someone bare. He began speaking before she even sat, his words tumbling out in desperate fragments, apologies layered upon apologies, confessions tangled with regret. He admitted his jealousy of her success, his insecurity around her intelligence, his shame for the exhibition scene, and his realization that he had destroyed the best part of his life with his own hands. Liora listened, not with the softness of a woman hoping to rekindle something, but with the steadiness of someone who had learned how to protect her peace. When Derek finished, she allowed a long silence to settle between them, a silence that weighed more than any argument could. She told him she believed his remorse was real, but real remorse did not erase real consequences. She told him she forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because she refused to allow anger to rent space in her heart. And as she spoke, Derek broke fully, his tears falling freely as he begged for another chance, for a fresh start, for a version of the story where he could try again and do better. But Liora shook her head gently, her voice warm but unshakable. "Forgiveness," she said, "is not a bridge back into my life. It is a door I'm closing peacefully." Derek's breath hitched, the reality of her words striking deeper than any humiliation he had endured. She stood, offered him a small, sincere smile, the kind given when a wound has finally closed, and walked away without looking back. Derek remained seated, shoulders trembling, finally understanding that some losses cannot be undone and some doors close forever. Months later, Liora stepped onto an international stage in Geneva, where she was being honored with a prestigious award for technological innovation across the African continent. The hall was filled with diplomats, global CEOs, economists, and innovators from around the world. As she walked toward the podium in an elegant gown, the room rose to its feet in a standing ovation that lasted longer than she expected. The applause washed over her like a warm tide, affirmation, admiration, and respect merging into a moment she would never forget. She accepted the award with a radiant smile and delivered a speech filled with wisdom, dignity, and gratitude. She spoke about perseverance, integrity, the quiet strength of women, and the beauty of rising beyond what was meant to break you. Her story, though painful in parts, had transformed into something powerful, a testament to the truth that dignity does not require revenge, and success does not require noise. She stood beneath the golden lights with a composure that made her glow from within, her spirit shining brighter than the award in her hands. And as cameras flashed and the audience applauded once more, she felt a peace settle in her heart, steady, whole, and deeply earned. This was the woman she had become, unshaken by betrayal, unburdened by the past, and unstoppable in her purpose. At the back of the hall, far from where she could see him, Derek stood silently among the invited guests, unnoticed, unimportant, a spectator to the greatness of the woman he once mocked. He didn't approach her. He didn't try to congratulate her. He simply watched as she reclaimed the narrative of her life with grace he no longer deserved to witness closely. And when she walked off the stage, surrounded by applause and admiration, Derek bowed his head in acceptance. Karma had completed its full cycle, not with revenge, but with elevation. Liora had risen beyond him, beyond betrayal, beyond pain. She walked forward into her destiny, crowned not by circumstance, but by resilience. Please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching to the end.